think is the 11th time we are doing CAMPfire Tales. And as always, it's hosted by Carmen Rendell from Soulhub. And you'll see her picture there. And as always, I'd like to say thank you to her because actually this was her idea originally. And we're all still on board on the first Thursday of every month. And each week, as you know, I try to talk about, each month rather, I try to talk about something different and to try to bring in somebody to tell a couple of stories to provide a bit of variety. Now, the person who will be doing that with me this evening is Pete Allison, who some of you met about 3 weeks ago, but he's just phoned to say that he's having dog trouble.
He's in.
Oh, is he here now?
Yeah.
Are you here, Pete?
Yes.
Oh, brilliant. You sorted your dog out then?
No, he is on the way to the vet right now.
So, oh, dear me. That didn't take long. Pete's just imported a Great Dane from Cape Town into mid-England, and he's already in the hospital.
He's been here 23 hours and is about to cost us a huge sum of money, but dogs are family. Hyenas are not.
No, exactly. Okay. Well, thanks, Pete. I'm glad you're here. Just got going. So, folks, we're going to talk about hyenas this evening. As always, if you've got a question, just put it in the chat box, and then we can answer your questions or statements. We can have a look at those as we go. But for the next hour or so, typically it's about 90 minutes actually, we'll be talking about hyenas, telling a few stories, and possibly dispelling a few myths about hyenas. Now, if you've been on safari or you've guided on safari, there's this enduring sort of attitude about hyenas that they are vile, disgusting, ugly, grave-robbing, evil, cowardly animals with a nasty, evil laugh. And as you know, Disney and movies like The Lion King have done nothing to dispel that myth at all. If you're looking for the bad guy in any story, in any animal story, then typically it's the spotted hyena that comes up. But if you have been on safari and you've spent any time with hyenas, you'll probably understand that they are amongst the most interesting of the many animals, predators and carnivores that we like to look at. And there's nothing more endearing, actually, than a baby hyena, a hyena pup or hyena cub, as we call them sometimes, which are very cute. So hyenas are not necessarily the ugly, beaten up animals that movies like to portray them as. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about hyenas and tell some stories, and to tell you that they are amongst the most interesting of all the animals. And they're in that same sort of realm for me as elephants, in this sense that they are always doing something. Hyenas are very active and social animals. And so it's gratifying if you're on safari to be taken to a hyena den. And one of the things we do as safari guides is we're always in competition with each other, actually, to try to figure out where a clan of hyenas have made their den. Because once you know where that is, you will be able to go to that den and spend time there and watch the little pups or cubs emerge from that den and play around the den and suckle from their mothers and tug at their ears and play with them. And those little puppies become very, very used to the vehicle very quickly. They become habituated. And we used to have lots of fun when I worked at Mala Mala, when we went to a hyena den, and you can park remarkably close to them because they habituate very easily. And those little cubs would come out of the hole. And when they are just a few weeks old, they're very tiny and they are pitch black and very cute. They look like tiny bears. And they would often come right up to the vehicle, and they're famous for chewing on the dust cap of the wheel hub of a Land Rover and removing it if you let them, or even chewing on your boot if you stuck it out through the open door. And one of the things we used to do would be, and it's a little bit naughty and infradig these days to do it, but we'd toss down a block of ice because there's always a cool box on the card. We toss out a block of ice. These little hyenas love to play with the ice. They never understood quite what the thing was, and they'd touch it with their nose and then rear back, trying to figure out what this frozen water was. So hyenas are absolutely fascinating creatures. Are we going to? I have no idea what Pete's going to tell us this evening and what information he's going to give us. But before we get to any more information, I'm going to tell you a story about hyenas, and it is from the Mala Mala days. And it's a demonstration, as many of these stories are this evening, I think, about how intelligent hyenas are. They're anything but cowardly or stupid. They're amongst the most intelligent of all the animals. And what we used to do there was do a game count. I believe it might have been monthly on the full moon, but I can't really remember that detail. But the guys from the Kruger National Park would come across, because Mala Mala and the Sabi Sand Game Reserve are a contiguous part of the greater Kruger National Park system. And there was no fence between those reserves, private or public. And they would come across to do the count. And they'd drive across in the Land Rover, and they'd park in a big open area. And they had these big speakers on the top of the vehicle. And they would climb onto the top of the vehicle themselves, and they'd do this at nighttime. And they would play the sound over these speakers of an animal being killed, an animal under attack from hyenas or lions, making a distress call. And sometimes as rangers, we'd go out with them. And it was absolutely fascinating, because predators would be attracted to the sound of this kill taking place, so-called kill. And it was always fascinating to me. Quite frequently, the lions would arrive there first. They'd come bounding in, because like hyenas, they're great opportunists. And nobody's going to go looking or trying to make a kill if there's one being made already and you can steal it. And the lions would come in, and they would look around. They'd see the vehicle. They'd know exactly what the vehicle is. They'd recognize us within the vehicle. But what they couldn't figure out was where the dead animal was. And they'd patrol around the vehicle looking. And then the hyenas, in some consternation and confusion, then the hyenas would arrive. And they'd walk into the clearing, and they'd see the Land Rover, and they'd recognize instantly what this thing was. And you could almost see the look on their faces as they said to each other, you know what, we've been fooled again. Look at those stupid lions walking around trying to find the dead wildebeest or whatever has been killed. But we know what this is. And then they would push off. Now, the reason that was good was, first of all, they weren't going to get too close to those lions. They're mortal enemies, and they don't like to get too close to each other. But secondly, what that meant was that you had this transient population of hyenas coming through the open area, and you can recognize hyenas reasonably easily, from their spots or from their habits, or because they've got a dislocated jaw or a torn ear or a particular scar. And so you'd be able to recognize them and count them. Whereas the lions, unfortunately, would just lie there waiting for something to happen, hoping for some meat. And so, you'd only really be able to count one pride of lions at a time, and then you'd have to relocate to a new territory. So what was always apparent there was that the hyenas were vastly more intelligent than the lions were, although that's not the way that they typically portrayed in the movies. And so that's just a short story to try to put hyenas in the best possible light in terms of their intelligence. I'm going to hand straight to Pete now, who I know has got some stories and things to tell us. So over to you, Pete.
Better unmute myself and start video. Thanks, Lloyd, and thank you everybody for joining. I'm going to tell a couple of unsatisfying stories tonight, and you'll figure out why they're not particularly satisfying. Most of what we're going to be talking about, or people thinking of when we talk about hyenas, are the spotted hyena. It is the villain of The Lion King. It is the laughing hyena. The striped will do a little bit of that laughter, but it's much, much rarer. But the unsatisfying story I've got is about the least of the hyenas. the aardwolf. And some would argue it's not a hyena at all. It sits in a different family, Protelidae. But we're going to have to start this story back before I was born, about the time Lloyd came into this world 15 million years ago, when there were many more than the 4 hyena species we have today. The dominant families of hyenas back then were not bone crushers. The bone-crushing hyenas did exist, and that's what we're familiar with today. But none of the species that we know today had evolved at this point. But at that point, most of the hyena family were more jackal-like. They were longer-limbed. Their limbs are of equal length, unlike the hyenas, which are very forward-dominant. And of those, and there were many, many, many species of those. And we don't know how many because, of course, the fossil record is incomplete. But we find many more of those than the bone crushers before they achieved dominance. And and just one caveat here. If I suddenly throw my headphones out and run off, or if I run off forgetting my headphones, I'm sole parenting while my wife has the dog at the vet, and I've got 2 children under 5 upstairs. But back to hyenas, and 15 million years ago, the only species left from that is the aardwolf. And it's a beautiful little animal. It's one of the more rarely seen on safari, a little bit behind pangolin and aardvark. And I had not seen one. I'd been guiding for, I think, probably half a decade or so, and I'd never seen an aardwolf. And of course, that which is unattainable or unobtained is the most fascinating. So I read everything I could about them. And in a place that I worked with Lloyd more than 20 years ago, I was racing back to camp, and I was racing back, not like many guys do because they're afraid of the chef. And if they're late for dinner, the chef beats them with a wooden spoon. I was racing back because we had strict rules that we had to be back by sunset. And that was monitored by national parks. And I knew national parks were in there. And I was always the last person back from game drive. I was in Africa to be on safari. I'd emigrated to be on safari. Why would I be the first person back? And as we were going, there was a very familiar shape. It was that downward sloping dog, if you want to give it a name. But you could just tell. There's just that thing where you could just tell it was not a spotted hyena. And it was just dark enough that I could turn my lights on, spun around, and there were the vertical stripes. I'd seen my first ever aardwolf. I saw it side on for the merest of seconds, and then it dashed, and I watched an aardwolf's backside disappearing. That was enough for me to be thrilled, and I got back. But the one thing that I'd read, one of the many things I'd read about them that stuck in my mind, was that an aardwolf will run and run and run and run, but it always goes back into its own burrow. A warthog is quite slutty with whatever hole that will go down. Porcupines, not so choosy either. In fact, it's the only animal I've ever heard of that will not choose any port in a storm. It returns to home port, guaranteed. And I was pretty sure as I'd watched this thing disappear under the horizon that I'd seen it disappear into a hole. So the next day, I managed to, through some wangling and wrangling, convince my guests that there was no animal in the world they wanted to see more than an aardwolf. And I took them to roughly the area that I thought this thing had disappeared into, very aware that the wildlife department was still in camp and that this was one of the further points from camp. And I would need to get back with enough to be a little sonic pop from the Land Rover on the way back. And Lloyd at that point may well have been my boss, probably. So he was in charge of my behavior. How did that turn out for you, Lloyd?
Yeah, well, we managed it. Hey, we're still talking.
So anyway, I got to the site and I waited and I waited and I waited. And of course, it was typically anticlimactic. But then as it was getting to that point, it was impossible for me to stay any longer. Out of a little patch of dust remarkably close to us, 2 triangular ears just popped up, just the ears. And I knew that I had the den, and I also knew I had to be back. I raced back. Now, those guests were not prepared to sit with me the next night. 3 nights later, I was back and I was there again. And this process went on. And what I love about the aardwolf is everything villainous you imagine of the hyenas, which is the spotted, the brown, and the striped. All of these things you hear, scavengers, they are thieves, grave robbers. Lloyd mentioned that is a common belief up in West Africa, is that they are grave robbers. These terrible attributes that are given to them, feminists even, all these slurs put against them. And the aardwolf does not represent any of that. They are so inoffensive that when they growl, they actually growl with their lips like this, as if they put their teeth in a jar for the night. And they growl like that, and the belief is it's because their teeth are so minimal that they don't want to give the game away, that they don't really have a threat. They have a big crest on their back they can raise up, almost doubles them in size. And so hopefully they're trying to pass themselves off as a spotted hyena or a striped hyena where they cross over. I was in Southern Africa. There are no striped hyenas. It's not a good thing to mimic. And then they go out at night and they are predators. They're carnivores, but so is the panda, and the panda eats bamboo. Panda is that worst of things. I'm a meat eater that went vegan. Would you like me to tell you about it? No? I'll take that as a yes. And the aardwolf is a complete insectivore. Not only that, it only eats termites. Not only that, it only eats harvester termites. Not only that, it only eats harvester termites that fall into the families Trinervitermes or Hodotermes because it can hear them. In the dry winter months when the grass, that long grass, starting May or June, is sitting there, these termites with their scissor-like mandibles are snipping away. And if you go to somewhere like Botswana or Namibia where the air is so still and there's no noise pollution, you can actually hear it. It sounds like somebody crinkling paper. It's a wonderful noise. And that is termites.
Yeah.
Without those termites, then the area would become moribund. No, you just have this dead grass sitting there. And unless a fire came through, the next year, no new grass could grow. So these termites, they're crunching away. In comes the aardwolf. Doesn't have the long, sticky tongue of many ant or termite eaters. It has a broad, thick tongue. We'll come back to that in a bit. Anyway, so they lick up these termites. They just lick against the grass. And once enough soldiers come, they move on. When it hits about 25% soldiers, they move away. They have a leathery muzzle that helps because these Trinervitermes and Hodotermes squirt acid into their face. Probably not very pleasant. Or maybe it's like Tabasco to them. I don't know. But they lick and lick and lick away, and then eventually they have to move on. And one of the greatest things you can ever see is as you get into the rainy season's period of abundance for every other animal, but the aardwolf gets skinnier. They're one of the only animals that selectively has their babies in winter. And they do this because in summer, as they go out to forage, and they can hear the termites, starts to rain. Then they can't hear the termites anymore. And you see them with this resigned shrug, and they're already that downward sloped back. They just lope back to their burrow and stay there. So anyway, fascinated by these animals, really, really wanted to go and spend time in this thing. And I managed to spend time there. And I got it to the point that the ears would pop out, then the eyes, then the nose, then the head, and then it would sit there beside the burrow and watch me. It would never move. It wouldn't move more than 50 centimeters. And I didn't want to stay long. It had work to do. But I wanted it to reach the point that it was properly habituated, and I knew there was a ticking clock. They have 3 months in a den typically before they move. And this is as a lead into the other story I'll come back to later. And then one evening, wasn't night yet because I had to be back by sunset, remember? I would never, ever break the law of a respectable nation like Botswana. One evening, as we're sitting there, a barn owl, the same barn owl that you all know from wherever you are because it's one of the most widespread birds in the world, if not the most widespread, flew low, low, low and slow, silent as they do. And as it got to the aardwolf, it did 2 laps right around its head, made a little halo, a barn owl halo around the aardwolf, and flew on. And the aardwolf didn't flinch, didn't even look up, just kept watching us. Oh, what a beautiful thing to have seen. It was just one of those lovely little moments. And I was the barn owl looking at the aardwolf. Did it think maybe there were mice around? Curiosity. And I waited and went on. And then the next night that I went up there, the same thing happened. And then a little while after that, I had to do it with different guests. Nobody wants to sit with an aardwolf except for me every night. I went back and I saw it a 3rd time. And then I went back and I found that aardwolf many more times, and I never saw the barn owl again. But 3 times in a row, at least, that I was there, I saw this thing. There are so many mysteries in the bush, and it's this great detective-like puzzle. And it's one of the greatest things is to solve this puzzle. What's going on there? And I've had some small victories and a couple of big ones. To this day, I don't know what was going on there. I can't explain. There was no apparent relationship, but there was a pattern. I don't know why that had formed. And that's what keeps you intrigued. Anybody that ever says, aren't you tired of seeing the same thing again and again, doesn't understand what they're looking at. And so that to me was probably the most magical experience I've had with hyenas. Most people want the gore and, oh yeah, this is how I lost my leg. None of that. That was the most magical experience I've had with a hyena or member of their family. All right, Lloyd, batter up.
Thanks, mate. So Pete's mentioned the insectivorous, that lightly built hyena, which is known as an aardwolf or earth wolf, if you like. There are 3 other hyenas. If ever you've read anything by Kipling describing India, any sort of safari stories out of India, you'll be very struck by the fact that they keep talking about the same animals that you would describe if you're describing an African safari. There's an incredible biodiversity overlap there. Sometimes it's exactly the same animals, the same species, lions and leopards, for example, cheetahs until the 1950s, the rattle or the honey badger, dogs and deer and antelope. So there's a lot of overlap. And one of the overlaps is hyenas. Pete mentioned a striped hyena earlier. The striped hyena lives in East Africa, but also extends all through the Middle East, through Iran, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and also down into India. And I know Pete's seen all 4 of those species, and so have I, and we consider ourselves lucky. There are 4 different species of hyenas extant in the world today. Almost always, when we say the word hyena, you're thinking of the spotted hyena, the so-called laughing hyena. And that is the one that we see mostly on safari. But there's a 4th hyena, which is called the brown hyena. And that hyena is a shaggy beast. It's also one of these robust, ground-running, bone-crushing hyenas with amazingly strong dentition, carnassial teeth, which are designed not for ripping, and premolars designed for crunching. Incredible power in the jaws. And long after other animals are finished with the kill, the hyenas will go along and they'll still be gnawing on the heavier bones, which offer nutrition to them. At an elephant kill or a rhino, a place where a rhino has died or a hippo has been killed, long after the major predators, the lions, have left, there's still lots of food available for hyenas. And those are typically the spotted hyenas. Brown hyenas tend to live in the drier areas of southern Africa only, the Kalahari, and famously the Namib Desert of Namibia. And it's a very different, shaggy-looking beast. It wears a rough coat, almost like a heavy jersey for those foggy areas in the coastal climate there. So those are the 3 bone-crushing, ground-running. I think Pete described them as being built for speed or speed endurance. They feature less often than the spotted, and it's the spotted that I'm going to talk about again. And it's a story from the Serengeti. Now, when I was in southern Africa guiding, you become very used to the fact that there are rocky crevices and particularly termite mounds. Not the termites that Pete has just been describing, the harvesters, but the ones that basically grow a fungus garden, and to do that, they create a castle that creates a particular level of humidity and moisture, and they cultivate fungus in there, and that's another story. But those are refuges also for many, many different wild animals, and they very often become the central part of the kingdom of a clan of spotted hyenas. And as I said earlier, if we want to go and see pups, that's normally where we go. That's where they keep hidden. But on the Serengeti, it's typically rather flat. You can picture the open grassland studded with occasional umbrella-shaped thorn acacia trees. But we all know that hyenas are very common, as are they in the bottom of the Ngorongoro crater. In fact, there they are the major and most dominant of the predators. And I did wonder where their nests were, so to speak. You know, where did they have their pups? It was never very apparent to me until one day I got to a lodge in the Serengeti, and the guide said to me that dogs, wild dogs, African dogs, painted wolves, okay, an entirely separate thing, not hyenas, but dogs, had been seen that day. Now that was a very exciting thing because most of them have died in the Serengeti from diseases they pick up from domestic dogs. They mix with the Maasai dogs there, and they're very susceptible to disease. And so for dogs to be there was very exciting. So we went out to find those dogs, and we did. The dogs then started to hunt in the late afternoon. And because we were there in June, the Thompson's gazelles had given birth. So these little Tommies are hidden in long grass by their mothers. And the grass is in patches all over the Serengeti, which is mostly being grazed at that time of the year by blue wildebeest and zebras coming through because it's the migration. And that's where these little babies are. And it was obvious to me that when it came time for hunting, these wild dogs, these hunting dogs, would forage through there and put up the Thompson's gazelles. And so that became the activity for the evening. It was very exciting. The dogs were not as successful as I expected them to be, chasing week or 10-day-old little baby gazelles around the veld, but they caught enough of them. And I started to wonder where the hyenas were. Because as you know, if there's a kill, you'll typically get a group of hyenas gathering to see what's left over. Of course, the Thompson's gazelle is only a few kilograms, and so there's not much left. But these dogs were starting to kill more than they could eat. And after a while, I noticed, as it started to get dark, I noticed a hyena appear on the scene, and there were 12 dogs. And then another hyena, and then a third hyena, and then a fourth, and a fifth, and a sixth. And I said to the guide, where are they coming from? It was as if they were magically appearing from the earth. And she said, they are. That's exactly what's happening. She said, there are lots of hyenas around here. It's just that they're living underground. And I said, show me where where are they living? And she drove me not more than a couple of 100 meters to a place that I would never otherwise have noticed. The grass was slightly taller. And lying there, sort of half hidden in their holes, just their heads sticking out, were a multitude of hyenas. And I don't know if this is the case, but it seemed to me that the chase of the dogs and these Thompson's gazelles had been going on all around these hyenas, and they hadn't bothered to pay attention until they felt that the hyenas, the dogs, had eaten enough to satisfy themselves, at which point they would be much more inclined to give up their kill. And as the hyenas started to gather, and I remember counting them, and there were exactly 12 of them, and there were 12 of these hunting dogs. As it reached a critical number, so the dogs started to give way to the hyenas. But what interested me most is that the hyenas are quite a lot more robust than these dogs. And yet the dogs managed to fend them off. You know, they bite at the hyena's backside. It's quite comical. And the hyenas make a funny yelping noise, and they tuck their legs in underneath them and try and stop their bums being bitten until it reaches critical mass, at which point the dogs then started to give way. And I said to the guide, so, is this a normal pattern? She said, no. She said, something else is going to happen now. You'll see. The hyenas managed to steal a few of the kills, and the dogs then lost interest. They were out-muscled, essentially, and they'd eaten enough for the evening, and they went off to rest out of harm's way. And then the hyenas started to hunt. Now, one of the fallacies about hyenas is that they're scavengers, nasty, horrible, filthy scavengers. And it's manifestly untrue. They do scavenge, but so do lions, and so do almost every animal that can get a free meal. But hyenas are actually amazingly successful, very well adapted, endurance, persistence hunters. And they started to do exactly what the dogs had done. And they started to run into this tall grass, and they would be flushing these Thompson gazelles out. But the difference was that the hyenas were much more clumsy about it. And where a gazelle could zigzag and sometimes duck left or duck right, and a dog would be able to follow, the hyenas would, every single time that happened, the hyenas would just keep running in a straight line, and they would abandon it and let the little gazelle escape. And then they would run into the long grass until, they surprised the gazelle that didn't have enough chance to get away. And in a straight line, they'd hunt it down, and they'd wolf it down, and it would be gone in seconds. And so two things that interested me most there was, first of all, where are the hyenas? They're not living in termite mounds. They're living underground because they have to. They excavate those burrows on there, and they have these blunt sort of claws on their dog-like paws, and they're able to dig reasonably successfully with those. And secondly, that they had a very, very different hunting technique. Now, if you're making a Disney movie about that, the story would go is that these stupid hyenas watched the dogs, who are, of course, wonderful animals and very beautiful and very clever, and watched their hunting technique and then learned from it and adapted it. But the difference is that they just don't do it very well. So those are the spotted hyenas. Pete, I'll ask you a question now. It's an easy one to answer, but it's one of the myths, of course, about spotted hyenas, or possibly all of the bone-crunching hyenas, is that they're hermaphrodite. They are both male and female, and that the female has a penis.
Yeah, the only person I know that might have actually checked that out is Dave Cockle, who's listening tonight. But it is, of course, a myth. They do have... There's in science there should never be any blushing, but they do have just particularly unusual, and you could even say extraordinary, genitals. And with so many wildlife myths, it was either the early naturalists or even the early agriculturalists who were the first people that encountered these animals with some repetition that came up with these theories, and they just perpetuated. And so some things are true. Elephants don't appear to forget.
No,
they are not hermaphrodites. There's very clear gender distinction. It's far more pronounced in the spotted hyena. And in fact, the spotted hyena is, in terms of mammals, the most female-dominated society. They are one of the most social of all mammals, perhaps along with us. But they are very much females in charge, not just physically, but there's even a royalty. If we got past the fact that they have funky-looking genitals, which leads to all sorts of issues. There's quite a bit of death in childbirth for both the mother and the pup, because the birth canal comes down as what's called a pseudopenis.
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of crippling aspects to it. But it is, for the females to become so dominant, they've actually evolved a very high testosterone level and a bunch of masculine features, which leads to them being far bigger than the males, as I said. That dimorphism is not true in the other three existing species. So, no, they are not hermaphrodites.
No. It's very difficult. Well, in fact, I don't know that I can do it, to tell females and males apart, unless you come across a particularly large one, which is clearly a female and probably potentially the dominant one in the clan. Are you able to do that?
No. I think there are times that and I think we spoke about this with elephants, where you hear somebody confidently say what age an elephant is. He's 37. And I always like to ask them then, how old am I? And if they can't get it to the year and we're the same species, then I don't trust them on an elephant. Similarly, if somebody says that's female hyena, I suppose if you had there's a whole bunch of hyenas together, the biggest of the big are females, but that doesn't mean that the ones smaller are males. They might just be young females.
Yeah.
And that's okay. It's okay not to be able to tell off the bat. I think it's a really good thing in guiding to be able to say, I would have to dissect it to find out, and let's not go to that extreme.
Yeah. One of the, Pete spoke about finding an aardwolf den, and as I said earlier too, finding any kind of den where animals are on a consistent basis is very, very gratifying. And one of the best experiences I ever had was the first time I went to Namibia, which was in June 2000. So, 20 years ago. I'd never seen a brown hyena. I'd never been in an area where brown hyenas were anywhere common. And I went to Namibia. Pete and I at that time worked for a company called Wilderness Safaris, and they had this very, very remote camp in the Skeleton Coast. Unbelievable place, just a wonderful place to be. And quite populated by wildlife, far more than you'd imagine. And the chief predators there are lions, but they're very, very widespread, and they tend not to go into the pure desert, the Namib desert areas, because they're rather water dependent. And the brown hyena, which in Afrikaans is called a strandjotwolf, which, a beachcombing wolf. And I was desperate to see a brown hyena. And I like Pete, there are certain animals iconic animals that you're really, really hoping to see, like an aardvark, for example. And you'll spend a lot of time trying to find those. And we were extremely fortunate to have a very sharp-eyed travel agent with us, and we were up on top of a high bluff, very barren bluff, and there was a dry riverbed below us with thick reeds. It was obvious that sometimes that river flowed in flood. I was scanning with my binoculars, but with her bare eyes, she saw movement. And when I clapped my binoculars onto it, I recognized it as a single brown hyena. And they're very, very nervous there. They're anxious. They hardly ever see any people, and they don't trust us with good reason. They feed primarily there on seals. They catch the Cape fur seal or sea lion on the beaches and then carry them inland to the Rocky Mountains, 20, 30 kilometers, where they will bring them to their pups. And because they were nervous, we approached it on foot. We weren't quiet. I snuck up on it. And I managed to get quite close to it before it saw me, and I found it at its den. And we always have this idea, again, fueled by movies, that wild animals carry food back for their babies to a cave somewhere. It can be true. It's not typical, and it depends on the species. But in this case, this particular brown hyena had carried lots of food there, and there's lots of old bones there. And there was evidence that it was still on occasion chewing on them from time to time. And it was an absolutely overwhelming moment for me to be able to see a brown hyena. They're the most remarkable looking animals, and very, very seldom seen, and actually far more widespread than you might imagine. So very, very gratifying to see them. Before I hand over to Pete for another story, I just want to mention that the Bible, I did a little bit of research around this, and it turns out that, and according to Wikipedia, which you can never question, of course, it's always 100% accurate, as we all know. But according to Wikipedia, the hyenas feature in the Bible in the book of Jeremiah. And I don't know exactly what they were. They did quote the Hebrew name, and apparently that translates to an animal which describes a hyena. So that was interesting. And also on that literary note, hyenas, and I would imagine it would be the striped hyena, since in the Bible. But in terms of this, I'm not sure. Quoted in Shakespeare in his play called As You Like It, he's specifically mentioned a hyena there. So that's quite interesting. But over to you, Pete, for another hyena story.
This is probably less of a story and just more of speculation. I said I'm going to prove, I think, quite unsatisfying tonight. I don't know why the barn owl did that. I don't know why the aardvolks almost seem to expect it. be unfazed by it. And the other thing I don't know, food for thought, if anybody's got an idea, speak up please, is why don't we like them? Why don't we like hyenas? And I've pondered this over the years, and my focus has been a bit sharpened in the lead up to this talk. And I've got a few theories that are half formed, half baked, whatever you want to say. But the one thing Lloyd mentioned then, with them being mentioned in the Bible and being the striped, is it could well have been the spotted. It wasn't that long ago that the spotted hyena existed throughout most of Europe. They have found remains of spotted hyenas in Plymouth, okay, not the US. The hyenas never made it into North America because there were hyena-like members of the dog family there that would have blocked them. But our ancestors in relatively recent history lived alongside something called the cave hyena, which we now know is a subspecies of the spotted hyena that we know today, Crocutta crocutta. And the one we've got is Crocutta crocutta crocutta. It's the subspecies level. This was Crocutta crocutta spellii, which means the cave hyena. We know it was spotted because there are cave paintings from France all the way through the Middle East of it. These things occurred through Russia, down into the Iberian Peninsula. They were in Spain and Portugal. The spotted hyenas, they were bigger. They were much bigger than the spotted hyena we know, which gets up to maybe 70 kilos or so. These things were over 100 kilos, the big ones. And that's the size of a lioness. That's the size of a pretty robust lioness, 100 or so kilos. And that is, imagine a front row forward with jaws that can crush straight through anything up to a giraffe's thigh bone. Perhaps they could do a giraffe's thigh bone, but there's no giraffes where they lived. So a pretty extraordinary animal. So maybe we've got some deep race memory of hyenas, so many bad experiences. We used to compete with them for real estate. Now, you think it's bad going up against Donald Trump. Imagine you've got a cave, it's your favorite place, and a clan of hyenas the size of lions want it. And there's evidence of displacement and then hyenas, then back to humans, then back to hyenas. They died out quite rapidly. We're not exactly sure why, a few 10,000 years ago. But there's a bunch of things around when they died out. Could have been climate change, which there are natural cycles of that, but this is not conspiracy theory. We are changing the climate now. And stop, everybody, please. But a really interesting theory is that one place where the cave hyenas were particularly dominant was in Siberia. And they were hunting wild horses. And let's not forget, here's another myth to dispel straight away, is that in many, many, many places, more often than not, hyenas have food stolen from them by lions more often than the other way around. In the Serengeti, it's 80% the lions stealing from hyenas.
Nowhere to hide.
Yeah. And similarly out there, so they were hunting the wild horses that are now mainly extinct. There's some breeding programs. I don't even know, it's Przewalski's horse or something to bring it back. The deer that we're familiar with, they're hunting animals you're very familiar with from European heraldry, but you don't associate with hyenas. And they were hunting people. And again, we know that because there are caves with human bones in it that were clearly crushed by hyenas. Versus bones of humans that were just dumped. So the theory is that the hyenas were so dominant there, it actually stopped humans from crossing to the Americas until they went extinct. And it was a late arrival in the Americas. That land bridge was there for a long time before we got across it. And humans spread like a pandemic. The moment we got the opportunity, the moment we decided that sharpening a stick and making it a spear made a lot of sense, about 100,000 years ago was really our creative explosion. And I think the world's probably worse off for it. We expanded everywhere really, really rapidly. But even with the land bridge across there, and there's this theory that hyenas blocked it. So 2 continents, at least, North and South America, were spared humans for a long time. perhaps because of hyenas. So they're the ultimate bidders on real estate, however you look at it. They kept us out of caves or chased us out of caves. They kept us out of 2 land masses, possibly. Maybe, again, there's some deep race memory of that we don't like because, or maybe it's because they are not appealing to us. Their spots are blurry as opposed, a cheetah, it's like somebody went to a fingerprinting thing and then just did their thumb over a cheetah. It's really neat and clean. And beautiful rosettes of a leopard, the cleanness of a lion, the shape of them, something you can't trust about a hyena's back. There's something about that jaw hanging open and drooling a bit. As Lloyd said, the babies are cute, but I started wondering if maybe we don't like hyenas. It's not to do with the aesthetics because they are a reflection of us. They are a highly, highly social animal. And there are enormous positives to hyenas. They are one of the only carnivores that take care of their sick and elderly. Let's say only animals overall. You will frequently see a 3-legged hyena. And that thing is so atrophied and withered, that injury happened a long time ago. And there's no way it is not being supported by its clan unit, its family unit. So we know that they look after their sick. We know they look after their elderly. And that, in our minds, is a positive. We know they're female dominated, and I'm completely behind that. I think that's great, makes a lot of sense in many ways. There's lots of things that we would consider a positive, but the things we don't like about them are everything that we admire in CEOs. They are strict into a hierarchy that cannot be shaken. They're big on nepotism. If you are the daughter of a clan leader, you are far more likely to become a clan leader yourself, even after your mother's death, if she dies in your infancy, than another female born at the same time. There's this royalty system to it almost. There's hierarchy, very well organized. Now, they can't beat lions with strength. They beat them through organization. And then if you hear about, but they do this, they still adapt. In business, we call that taking advantage of opportunities. There is a weak animal. That is a resource. I will consume that resource. That's all that they're doing. These things we're going, terrible, disgusting, scavenging, drooling, foul animals. And then we bow down to the wealthy among us who've got there through taking a company, breaking into smaller parts, doing whatever else it might be. So I wonder if there isn't something that we see in hyenas and go, oh, that's just us with acne scars or whatever it might be. So again, I'm not satisfied with my own answer there. I can't figure out why we don't. There's plenty of, there's a black rhino on the wall behind me. Based feature upon feature, really not actually a good-looking animal. 2 things growing out of its nose, a serious overbite. Let's not get into figure shaming, but it's not Sports Illustrated material, and yet we look at a rhino and admire it and love it. So it's not about it being unrelatable physically. There's something about them that we just can't get to. Maybe they hunted us, but leopards hunted us. Lions hunted us.
Yes.
So again, I'm being, I didn't set out to be unsatisfying tonight, but I'm hoping maybe some of you have got an idea. Dave suggested that the hyena from Plymouth escaped from a zoo. That zoo from 10,000 years ago, perhaps. But it's really, really fascinating to me that this is the one animal we can't get past. And before you freak out about hyenas in England, go to the museum in London, and there's a hippo skull in there that was from a native hippo about 40,000 years ago.
Yeah.
That's mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, not very long ago at all.
Yeah.
Another question has just come up. Before I address that, some people will say, they are disgusting creatures. If you've ever seen a hyena emerging from the body cavity of a dead giraffe, let's say, or a hippo, and they're covered in gore and shit and all sorts of stuff. They've been in there getting at the internal organs, and they appear to be brutal, and there's blood hanging from their jaws. Have a look at the lions that were there just before them. They are equally as grubby and dirty, and possibly less concerned with keeping themselves clean than hyenas. So hyenas do tend to get bad press. You can't really talk about hyenas without, if you've ever watched a movie on hyenas, you'll never really be able to go past the movie, which is called Eternal Enemies. And it was filmed in Botswana. It's one of the most miraculous pieces of movie footage that's ever been made, because Joubert, the guy who filmed it, took it in a single shot. He was very fortunate to be in an open area with a short grassland, not many trees. And not only that, but the scene that he filmed took place in front of him without any interruption, uninterrupted. And it is the final scene of a drama where he depicts the eternal conflict that goes on between lions and hyenas. And it makes for high drama. And that particular scene is where a big lion, which he called Intwai Dumela, I think.
Intwai Dumela.
What's it? The lion that...
Intwai Dumela, he who roars at night.
Roars at night, yeah. It's a name that he created. Yeah. You need that if you're going to make a movie. That lion chases a single cheeky hyena, and he chases and chases and chases, and the hyenas are quick, but this lion is quicker, and he draws closer and closer and closer, and that hyena is looking back, and as the lion gets closer and the hyena starts to recognize his inevitable fate, he starts to tuck his backside in to try to keep it away from the lion. With each bound, each step, the lion is drawing closer, and each time one of his forepaws is just missing, and eventually, with a single claw, he snicks onto one of those hyena's back legs, and they tumble, and they're joined together in dust. And then as the dust settles, the big lion bites into the back of the hyena's neck and cripples him, or into his back and cripples him, and then walks away. Doesn't kill him, leaves him crippled and dying slowly. Now, it's very, very, very easy to attach human emotion to all of that. But the reality is that I wouldn't say that lions and hyenas necessarily hate each other, because that's more of a human emotion, but they are in conflict with each other for the same resources. And I saw that happen when I was working in the place called Cylinder Game Reserve in Botswana, where we were at a kill site down at the Zabalianja Lagoon, and there were 3 lions there, dominant males. They'd been there for 2 or 3 years. Beautiful, magnificent males. And they were feeding. They just made a kill, and they were eating. There's lots of meat available. They had absolutely no need to be anywhere else. Everything they needed was there, including water. And that should have been enough for them. And another guide called a sighting of hyenas. I forget what they were harassing, several miles away. And because we'd been watching these lions for an hour or two, I said, and it was getting dark, I said, let's go up there. It's on the way home, and let's see what's going on. And as we got closer to the sighting, you could hear these hyenas cackling as they do. And what they do is they get each other very, very excited, and their tails fluff up at the back, and they posture and they moan, and they have a huge range of vocalizations. And that laugh of theirs is a very excited sort of chatter. And the problem with hyenas is that they can't shut themselves up. They get so excited that they can't be quiet. And what happens is they attract other predators, and including other clans of hyenas. And then it becomes a numbers game. They are not necessarily solitary hunters. They might be, but they are very, very bound to their clan. And they do come in numbers, but sometimes one clan's larger than the other. So you have this sort of clan warfare. They were out of what I thought was hearing of those lions. And so we watched this kill, and the hyenas were very excited. And then in the darkness, I told a story the other day about how the guide I was with called a lion in, and I could hear it before I could see it. And that's exactly what happened. In the darkness, I could hear the sound of running. And I said to the people I was with, listen, those boys are coming, those 3 big boys. And they had run miles, but they'd heard those hyenas. They had a perfectly good kill. They weren't hungry. But there's a prerogative amongst them to make sure that hyenas, spotted hyenas, come second. And there were dozens and dozens of hyenas from at least 2 different clans there, squabbling over this kill. And I wondered just for a moment whether that would be enough. But those hyenas never stood a chance. And those lions came without making any noise except the sound of their hooves. But the hyenas were so enraptured by their own their own excitement that they didn't hear it coming. And those lions came out of the darkness and they ran into the spotlight. Now, remember, we had a red filter on that light. And so there was this diffuse light and you could just see the kill and lots of hyenas all over the place, fighting and biting. And into that spotlight, that patch of red diffused light, barreled these 3 lions. And it was absolutely incredible. And each of them swatted a hyena, grabbed and smashed a hyena, killed 2 of the hyenas. And the rest of them absolutely disappeared. They were gone in a second. The lions didn't eat the hyenas. They seldom do. They just killed them and left them lying there. They then proceeded, it was a smaller kill, I forget, it might have been an impala or something of that nature. The lions then devoured the impala and then at their leisure, an hour or 2 later, got up and we followed them all the way back to the original kill. So that eternal conflict between lions and hyenas is in the same sort of realm as this human dislike that Pete's just been describing, this inherited hatred somehow, or fear perhaps is what it is, of hyenas, particularly spotted hyenas, and particularly when they gather in numbers. I want to talk about humans and hyenas and how dangerous hyenas can be to humans, but I'll come back to that later. I want to give Pete another opportunity. Over to you, Pete.
Okay, so perhaps the kind of story people might have wanted before I was getting my unsatisfactory ones, and this one's pretty quick, but I started working in the bush when I was 19 years old. I was fresh out of Sydney. I had 0 experience in the African bush, apart from having watched documentaries. And I was running the bar in a game lodge. And if you're running the bar, you are typically the last to bed. You lock things up. And funnily enough, you're locking up because of hyenas. You're not so worried about human theft.
Yeah, exactly.
You're locking up so you have doors or gates, whatever it might be, to stop hyenas from coming in and chewing up your cushions and eating your curios. And we had a thing which is actually not that unusual start happening, where there was a hyena who would appear every night with 2 very youngsters. And we used to eat in a boma because it was South Africa in the 90s, and they were convinced that's what everybody in the world wanted to do. So we'd sit there, and it was actually, I enjoyed it. And these 2 young hyenas would be just at the edge of the firelight. You'd get the occasional twinkling in the eye. And over time, they moved closer and closer, and they got bigger and bigger until they used to actually sit in the boma with us. We'd drawn a bit of a line in the literal and metaphoric sand that we wouldn't let them get so close. We didn't want them taking food from people's plates or fingers from their hands. So we'd drive them back a bit. But as staff members, when you were walking around, they would be either side of you, and it was completely comfortable. They were pets you couldn't pat. And one night, closing up, as I'd done plenty of times before, in fact, I'd done for about 50 nights straight, I was walking back to my room. It's a little room, and it's always a bit further out, uncomfortably close to the generator when it's running, power's down. And there was a hyena either side of me, and it happened plenty of times before. I'm like, gosh, you guys are grown. And then I looked ahead of me, and there were 2 more hyenas sitting in between me and my room. I looked and thought, you haven't grown. This is not who I think it is. I looked over my shoulders, and there were more hyenas behind me, and I couldn't really tell how many. If it had only been 2 or 3 years later, I would have known, just carry on walking to your room. this is going back to what I was talking about with hyenas being business people. They were just doing their due diligence. Was I ripe for acquisition? And if I'd carried on walking and just gone to my room, stepped inside and closed the door, they would have said, no, that one's not ready yet. But instead, I got nervous. I showed my weakness. And as I got close to a tree, which was right by the workshop, a type of acacia called a knob thorn, because it has knobs and it has thorns and the knobs have thorns, and it's every bit as uncomfortable as it sounds. I took about 2 running steps and I got up that tree in a way I never could have done as a kid. And I'm ashamed to say I've spent more time in trees as an adult than I did as a child, but that's, again, more to do with being wildly inexperienced in anything at all when I became a guide. And I got up into that tree, and at one point, the hyenas got excited, like Lloyd said. They whoop it up, and they were doing their laughter. And I just sat up there, and their laughter attracted more hyenas, and at one point I could count 16. Mm. And I had that thing, I'd been up there for quite some time, and I could see my room. I could have called for help, but in the louder voice in my head was saying, Carmen's listening to this going, why do you have different voices in your heads? In your head, singular. The louder voice was saying, if you call people out, you're endangering them. And the quieter voice was saying, you're so embarrassed, aren't you? And of course, the quieter voice is the truer one. And I was embarrassed enough that I stayed there until the sun rose. And the hyenas ghosted away into the dawn, bit by bit, and there was none left. And I dropped down from the tree, and I was still so embarrassed that this happened. And I kind of, once I was up in the tree, I knew I'd done it wrong. I was pretty sure somebody had said to me, never run. Whatever you do, don't run. Phrase I co-opted later on. And as I was getting to my door, a friend and mentor, still both today, a man named Ian Garrett, stepped out of his room a little way away, and he goes, why are you up so early? I said, couldn't sleep.
Pete had a question here, and it's one of the old saws that guides tend to regurgitate. Are they dogs or are they cats?
Would you like me to answer that?
Well, let me answer it myself, and then you feel free to add what you like. The reality is, folks, is that they're neither. They're hyenas. They are dog-like creatures. They certainly are carnivores, but they're much more closely related to civets and genets, if you know what those are. And one of the ways that you can see that is the way they mark territory. You know, dogs and true dogs and cats tend to use urine or feces sometimes, or other glands around their neck or their face to rub a scent or to leave a mark behind. But typically urine, because they have more urine than anything else. And it's mobile. As they move around, they can produce prodigious quantities of it. Hyenas don't do that. They paste. They have an anal gland, and there's this white paste that comes out of it. And if you look at civets and genets, which are reasonably common in Southern Africa and across Africa and the world, actually, they too have the same gland and the same pasting. That paste, you can see it quite clearly. If you watch a hyena pasting and then you go to the grass or the log that they've wiped that gland on, you'll see the paste there and you can smell it, and it's very pungent. It's a very, very clear smell. It's a very clear signal to other hyenas, not other animals necessarily, but certainly to other hyenas, that this is their land, and that you're not welcome. And that's very characteristic of that family of genets and civets too. And that's why we tend to call baby hyenas cubs rather than pups, but you know, they're not really cubs either. Also, if you've ever watched a cat grooming, when it's licking its genitals, it's got a way of picking its back leg up to reach down and clean itself. And that is one of the things that hyenas do. It's a very particular kind of cleaning motion. So these are some of the ways that we distinguish. tends to be one of those sort of guiding myths or apocryphal stories that hyenas are much more closely related to cats than they are dogs. And the reality is that hyenas are hyenas. There are 4 kinds of hyenas in this world today, and that's what they are. I think Pete might have gone off to go and look at some children, so I'm just going to keep on going here. Also, Nolene asks the question, why do they stink worse than any other predator? I'm actually not conscious of that, Knowles. I've always found lions to be pretty stinky things if you get close and downwind. But I'm sure you're right. You obviously had a close experience of the worst kind with one of them. So, but the reality is any animal that eats meat for a living, especially if it's predating on dead animals, is going to acquire some of the smell of them. Some of you will remember that I told a story about Jimmy the hyena from a camp called Mambo in Botswana, and I'm not going to repeat that story, but it demonstrated the intelligence of Jimmy. It ended up being tragic, of course, very sad, but Jimmy was one of those hyenas who was capable of learning, who constantly outfoxed us, outwitted us, was forever breaking into the camp and stealing and eating things. And the wildlife official who came ultimately to shoot Jimmy, and it's an unfortunate long story, you may recall, also believed that witches ride upon their backs. And there's many, many African myths. There are dozens and dozens of beliefs associated typically with spotted hyenas, and the fact that they're associated with witchcraft. And just as a little aside, going back to my own home province, which is KwaZulu-Natal province in South Africa, the man who founded the Zulu nation, the Zulu kingdom, was a man called Shaka Zulu. He came to power in 1818, and he was only there for 10 years before he was murdered by his brothers. But he gave that province part of its name. And he, like many people who depend on superstition and witchcraft to maintain order amongst their people, used wizards, soothsayers, magicians, to instill fear in their people. But he wasn't a fool, and he knew that they were typically just making up nonsense, throwing and reading the bones, etc. And if he caught them out, and or if their prophecies failed, so if he sent an impi, for example, on the warpath, and they failed, which the Zulus didn't often do, but if they were defeated in battle and came back in tatters, then the soothsayers who had predicted their victory would be executed by Shaka Zulu. Now, of course, the soothsayers always predicted victory. It was a very short-lived profession if they predicted defeat. And one of the ways that he used to do that was that they would capture spotted hyenas, starve them, put them in a hut, and then chuck the soothsayers in there with them and have them eaten alive. And it's a rather horrifying thought, and it raises the question, okay, that's an artificial situation, but it raises the question, what about hyenas and people? And do hyenas eat people? And more importantly, if they do, then how often does that happen? And just like with leopards and with tigers and with pumas and with jaguars and with bears and many other major predators around the world, including great white sharks, for example, large predatory animals will eat any kind of meat that they chance upon if they think that it's a good opportunity and they're likely to succeed. Now, if you're a tribal person anywhere in India or Africa, and it's hot, and you choose to sleep outside your hut on a rush mat or a simple blanket, and you're not very close to the fire, and perhaps even if you are, you have a very much stronger chance of being killed by a hyena. The answer is yes, that hyenas do kill people. They don't kill people in the same numbers that elephants might, for example, or hippos, or mosquitoes through malaria. But there are many, many stories of hyenas, and there's a very famous one from the 1950s in Malawi, where 2 hyenas, very big hyenas, which were measured in the 50-kilogram range, which is massive for a hyena, killed 42 people over about a 5-year stretch until they finally managed to shoot those hyenas. If an animal, any animal, starts to understand that we are really vulnerable, especially as individuals, that we are soft-skinned, that we're blind at night, that we don't hear very well, that our sense of smell is very pathetic. We can't even run particularly quickly. If that's all we are, then they will fancy their chances, especially if they can gather in numbers. And there've been some, and every now and then in the news, you'll pick up a story. It's typically a tourist being pulled out of her car by a lion in some sort of lion park. But every now and then you'll pick up a story about a wild animal, a grizzly in Alaska, for example, eating a hunter or a fisherman. And there've been a few of those in KwaZulu-Natal, and 2 of them come from Umfolozi Game Reserve. One of them, many local people there will know, was of a kid at a local high school in Kloof, a town in KwaZulu-Natal, who was on a wilderness trail. And on his first night, well, it might not have been the first night, but on one of the evenings there, a hyena actually entered the tent and bit this kid in the face. Now, what that hyena would have been doing was testing. The kid was a teenager, vulnerable. It was nighttime. The animal's much more confident, as are lions and leopards, for example, at nighttime. And it was having a bit of a taste to see what its options were. And clearly, when that kid woke up, screamed or whatever, and there was a commotion in camp, then the hyena left the premises. And that's a tragic accident, and it can happen. And there's one that's that actually had fatal consequences in Botswana, in a campsite, where a young American boy, nobody knows what happened. We're not sure whether he was sleeping with the tent flaps open. Remember, we're talking about a very simple safari where people are pitching their own tents on the ground in lion, elephant, and hyena country. And that kid was dragged from his tent and actually decapitated. And his mother was in camp that night, and it became a very, very big drama, as you can imagine. Now, for that sort of thing to happen is extremely rare. But I know that campsite. And for those of you who have been to the Savuti and possibly driven through there and camped in those public campsites, people do what people always do, is they build a fire, they have a braaivleis or a barbecue, they eat their lamb chop, and then they throw the bone to a lurking hyena, which is just on the edge of the light, because it's fun to do. Those hyenas, being intelligent animals, know exactly where the easiest food is available. And so they become very habituated, not tame, but habituated, and they lose their fear of people. And once they see people like Pete's climbing up the tree, once they understand that we're actually afraid of them, especially at nighttime, they then become super confident. And if their numbers grow, then they would be prepared to attack people. There's Tony, 6'2" Tony is on this. He's an ex-Mala Ranger. And he might want to weigh in on this thing. Tony, but do you remember a story about somebody being chased down Harry's axis? Let me see if I can find Tony. Tony, do you remember that?
Wasn't it Grant?
It was a story about a guy who broke down on the way to Harry's and at nighttime, and he decided to walk.
Yeah, it was 6'4" Grant Nell with a shovel.
Yeah, with a shovel, exactly.
Yes, he ended up beating the thing off with a shovel.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, exactly. So, and what happened there was that he had breakdown. I think he couldn't change. I don't know what it was. The car broke. He was several kilometers, I think, from camp. It's a very dark part of Mala Game Reserve, thick bush, not a trace of light. And all he had, for some reason, he didn't have his rifle with him, but he did have a shovel. We all had shovels because we were forever getting stuck in the Sand River crossings. And he decided to walk, and he became aware of a sound behind him. And he had a very poor flashlight with him. And when he turned around, he saw not one hyena, but several. And they became bolder and bolder. And he started to jog or run down. And I'd forgotten it was him, but he started to run down the road. And of course, you know what it's like. That's why dogs chase cars. They think that cars are trying to run away from them. That's why dogs chase people, or people on bicycles. It's an illusion that you're afraid of them. In this case, he was. And he did manage to swing a shovel at one of them and hit it on the head, and managed to save himself and get to camp. But when he arrived at camp, he was in a hell of a state. So a long-winded answer to the question are hyenas dangerous to people? Yes, they are in certain circumstances.
What he should have done, if I can just interject there,
I do.
Lloyd.
Yeah.
What he should have done, and I'm not sure how many people on this would have seen that gods must be crazy. I don't know how accurate it is because I never had the chance to test it. But the two little Bushman kids, when they got tracked by a hyena,
Yeah.
and all he did was pick up a stump of wood and put it on top of his head to make him look taller.
Okay.
And every time the hyena got close, he'd turn around and he'd put the stump of wood on his head.
Oh, really?
And the hyena would stop, yes.
I don't
Anyway.
remember that detail. I was sort of preoccupied about what they're going to do with the Coke bottle.
No, it might have just been because he didn't have a shovel, though, so I don't know.
Right. Is Pete Allison back on board yet? Or let's just have a quick look. No, don't think so. Okay. So I want to talk about the fact that hyenas also can be pets. They're completely tameable. And if they're raised from a young age, then just like anything, just like a black rhino, like a hippo, like a leopard or a lion, they are animals which, if you raise them from birth, are tameable. Of course, you don't quite know what's going to happen down the line when they get big and strong and forget their own strength. But it's very well known in West Africa, and it might be Nigeria or Sierra Leone where hyenas are common, is that hyenas become very urbanized there. And the reason they become urbanized is the same reason that red foxes, common foxes in the UK, become urbanized and overpopulated. And it's because we make it so easy for them. Now, we have our bins collected here in the UK where I live on a Monday morning. People put out their general rubbish also on a Sunday night. And I'm forever going down the alley and taking that rubbish and locking it away at nighttime and then taking it back out on a Monday morning. Because foxes aren't stupid and they know where all the good food is. And there's all sorts of bones and vegetables and delicious food in those bags, and the foxes are ripping it open. We always blame the foxes for making a mess, which is ridiculous because it's a human-created problem and we're just not being clever enough. Hyenas are opportunists like the foxes are. And they live in urban areas, not in the major cities of Africa, but particularly on the fringes, especially of rural towns, but sometimes in the bigger cities too. Just as leopards, for example, are very urbanized in the middle of Mumbai in India because they feed on domestic pigs. So hyenas are quite common in certain urban areas of Africa. And there are certain people who take on the power of the hyena, the fear that humans have for hyenas, by taming them and feeding them. And you might have seen this on YouTube, where these guys, sometimes they muzzle the hyena, but they walk them around the town on leads, these massive big hyenas. The hyenas are desocialized because they live on their own, so they've become more human-like in a sense than the clans that we've been talking about in the wild. They tend to adopt their master, the person who tamed them, as their superior, they're subordinate to that person. And those people feed them, and they feed them, and it becomes a bit of a tourist attraction by putting food in their own mouths, bits of meat in their own mouths, and then allowing the hyena to take the food from their mouth. Anybody who's seen a hyena at work, especially in the presence of a kill, will wonder about that. But it's quite something to have a look at. So hyenas are very successful, very widespread, very fantastic opportunists. They're both hunters and scavengers, and they're amazing. And I want to finish off with a final story, which comes from the Ngorongoro Crater Lodge, where hyenas are common, and they are by far the most numerous of all the predators there. And it's absolutely incredible to see them operating. There are very few lions down there, so there's very little opportunity for them to steal a kill. The lions are very wary. If they make a kill, they try to eat it quite quickly. There's nowhere for the lions to hide it. It's the bottom of an ancient volcano, and it's short grassland, slightly undulating with a few rivers running through it. Amazing place. And I was there about 2 years ago with some folk, and we had been down at a hippo pool, and there are lots of hippos grunting around, and there were lots of animals there come down to drink called topies, which in Southern Africa we call a sesame. And it's a very swift, fast-running animal, built like a hyena, short back legs, long front legs, built for speed. But of course, so are hyenas. And they were milling around, and there were hyenas there showing absolutely no interest. So they were doing what Pete was saying. They were doing their due diligence, the hyenas. We could see that they hadn't eaten. You can always tell from the stomach or whether there's blood around the mouth, how recently they've eaten. And in this case, they were quite lean. And, you know, I felt that they probably would hunt, but you have to be lucky to actually witness that happening. Because obviously they're more successful at nighttime because, you know, they can sneak up better. And so we left that sighting and we went up onto the crater's edge to go and have some coffee. And I was looking down and I started to where these hyenas were gathered near the water, just spread around. There were probably 4 or 5 of them. And I started to notice as it got warmer that hyenas were popping up everywhere, as I described earlier, out of this flat grassland, popping out of their little holes, their subterranean refuges. And they started to gather. And I said to the guide, and they were all walking towards the water. And there was something menacing about them. They were walking with a certain intent. They've got this way of walking with their necks. It's a big, thick, strong neck. They're robust animals, walking with their head out and their neck stretched out and their head low. And it looks mean. It looks businesslike. And I saw them starting to do that. And I was sure that they were communicating with each other somehow. And I said to the guide, we need to get down there because something's going to happen. It was a bit of a mission to get there. You're not allowed to drive off road, so it was quite a long way to get there. But ultimately, we got there. And the timing was absolutely perfect. Now, for those people who go on safari hoping to see a kill, it almost never happens. I mean, it happens all the time, but you almost never see it. But this was one of those days where we were rewarded. There were hundreds of topies there. And as the hyenas gathered in numbers, somehow they communicated with each other, and it wasn't vocal as far as I could tell. And they chose a small group. Now, to get to that, and I think the reason they did was because there was a baby. There was a youngster there with a mother. But it was a fairly large group, probably 20 different topies. But there were hundreds of topies, but somehow they chose that one. And they walked towards it in a very nonchalant sort of fashion, as if they were just passing by. And as they got to within, I'd say, 100 or 150 meters, that topi recognized what the game was. And she started to trot. They have a very light jog, just to see. And the hyenas picked up speed. And she started to run faster, away from the water. And the hyenas picked up more speed. And then more and more hyenas gathered. And she did what she shouldn't have done, is she started to run. She showed her weakness. She should have stood. If she had stood, the hyenas would have walked right past her and picked somebody more vulnerable. But she started to run and the baby followed. And very quickly, she was on her own. And then she was a very, very clear and obvious target. But topies are fast. And she wasn't running at full speed. She was running just fast enough so that the baby could keep up with her, hoping, I think, that the hyenas would give up on the game and then go back and hunt something else. But the hyenas kept at it. And ultimately, there must have been 20 or 25 hyenas in on the chase, chasing just a single topi and her baby. And they have this ground-eating, energy-efficient stride. And they loped behind her. And she kept a distance of 150, 200 meters ahead of them very easily for minute after minute after minute. But each time she turned a corner, hoping to get back to the herd where sanctuary lay, the hyenas would cut the corner. And so then they'd be a little closer. And she'd turn again, and they'd cut the corner, they'd take the shortcut, and they'd be a bit closer. And at no stage did a single hyena break into a sprint, loping along. And eventually she ended up back at the river where she had started. She'd run this great big loop. And by the time she approached the river, she was going at full speed. She was obviously, though, tiring, and the hyenas were on her heels. And she then did the only possible thing that she could do. It was very obvious the hyenas were about to grab her and pull her down. Now, while this chase was happening, they were running through between other topi. But the hyenas never wavered. They picked their target. They chose her. They'd done all their homework on her, and they knew that they were going to get her. And so did she. And so she did the only thing she could. And she dived into the river, followed by the baby. Guess what happened next? East Africa is full of crocodiles. And there were crocodiles waiting in the pond. And she swam across with the baby at her heels. And as she was about to emerge on the far bank, possibly to safety, although, mind you, hyenas love water. They love to rest in water and mud. And they're very good swimmers. A crocodile grabbed her and the baby and killed them and drowned them both. You might think that's the end of the story. Those hyenas that had done all the hard work were on the far bank and were now robbed of their kill. But these hyenas on this bank where we were parked had been watching all of this with interest, hoping to dive in on the kill later or possibly steal it from the group that had been chasing. And they went down to the water's edge, and a tug of war ensued between them and the crocodile. Now, crocodiles, they need to drag their carcass. They can't bite off chunks of it. They basically have to sink it and let it rot and then spin and twist and break pieces off and then swallow it whole. And so they can't immediately consume their prey. So all the crocodile can do is hold on to it, and a tug of war ensues. And eventually and sometimes the hyena would be dragged into the water. It didn't seem to worry about that because the croc already had something to grab. Of course, that doesn't mean there weren't two crocs in the pool. And a tug of war ensued until both the baby and the mother were torn to shreds. And then a hyena emerged up the bank carrying the forequarters of this topi and took it to safety away from where the crocodile was and ate it, or parts of it anyway, right in front of us. Other hyenas then descended on it and it got shredded limb from limb, and they all went off with their own pieces. And that was one of the dramas of the African bush that you tend to not to see if you're on safari, although you're rather hoping something like that will unfold, but which is captured in movies made by wildlife. In fact, I think one of them might be here. Is Wayne Hind on this? He was here earlier. Yeah, Wayne and Ness are here. So if you see Wayne and Ness, a little dark window there, they make or used to make wildlife movies, and they'll attest to the fact that it takes you probably a year to film enough footage to make a decent 50-minute video by the time you finished editing it. And you need to be there. You have to be patient to witness that sort of thing. So hyenas are, to my mind, and to wrap this all up, are absolutely magnificent creatures. They're very interesting to watch. They're very clever. They keep us entertained. Please don't fall for the myth that they are creatures of evil. We don't need to fall prey to superstition or to the Disney myth. But of course, every story needs a villain, and they do set themselves up for that. So I'd just like to say thanks to Pete, who I think has gone missing in action, put his babies to bed. But in his absence, thank you very much for joining again. And also to everybody else who's come on this evening. Great pleasure to talk about Africa. I have not been there since March for obvious reasons. I can't tell you how much I miss it and miss being on safari. It's starting to burn now. And so we're all very much looking forward to resuming our careers as guides, getting back to Africa, taking people on safari and telling stories like this and unlocking the story as it all develops. So much appreciated. Thanks very much for tuning in. And we're going to be doing this on the first Thursday of the next month, which will be, I'm just having a quick look at my calendar here. It is November. Anybody quicker than me on this? The 5th, I believe. Yeah. 5th of November, which is